Hello everybody, welcome to number 27 and to a car that I've been wanting to feature for quite some time. Now the DB5 is actually the most famous and desirable Aston of this era, but the DB6, this, for me, is actually a much more interesting and better car. So how is it possible that a car which is better in every measurable way than its older brother is less in demand? That's what we're going to find out today. I also want to thank a new channel sponsor, Bidding Classics. It's an online auction for classic cars with no buyer's fees. Do go and check out their website, see what's listed. The link is in the video description. The DB series of cars were named after David Brown, who ran the factory at the time. There is an interesting story about one of his acquaintances when the DB5 was launched that asked him if it was possible to have one of these cars at cost price. David Brown said he was absolutely delighted to oblige. 6 months later, he delivered the car to the new owner and it cost £1,000 more than the list price. This just goes to show how difficult it was to make money on these cars and why it was important for Aston to scale up production compared to the previous car, the DB5. To do that, they had to make this more usable and more desirable. Let's take a look around. I can tell you about the differences with the earlier car, and more generally, we can just take a closer look at this absolutely gorgeous, gorgeous car. The most notable change was an increase in wheelbase and 2 inches in roof height, and that had the biggest impact in the cabin. First of all, it made it a genuine 2+2. It gave you more luggage space and there was generally more room, more space. The seats were nicer, they were more comfortable, better made. And one of the other things is the previous car had a really difficult reverse to engage. You had to pull it up, push it to the side, often ended with owners with the gear lever in their hands, and this was changed to just a standard off to the side reverse, which made things a lot easier, the car a lot more drivable. There were other little revisions to the interior, more dials, and generally the DB6 is felt to be a little bit more luxurious and a little bit more polished than the earlier car. Love these smoked lens sun visors as opposed to, clip it back into place, as opposed to the old style sort of ones that you normally get. These are really cool. And we mustn't forget 2 other very significant developments that were introduced with the DB6. For the first time, as options, you could get power steering and what was, by all accounts, a very, very crude air conditioning system. Now, you can't really emphasize enough in those days how important that was to make a car like this more usable. This one doesn't have power steering, and I see how I fare with that today. Cosmetically, there was another big difference, and this was perhaps one of the areas that caused the most controversy, and that is the back end of the car. This is maybe the one area of the DBs between the two which is markedly different. This has the aerodynamically efficient camtail. Now this is a massive improvement on the original car, which provided a significant lift of the back end at higher speeds. So this makes it more efficient and more stable. But people at the time didn't think it looked as good. Personally, I prefer it. Now you will notice the bumpers have been taken off. James, who owns this car, prefers the look without them. That was another difference, is that the original DB5 had one single bumper. This had a split bumper. But my own personal preference is actually for this fastback design to the original one, which I think breaks up the bodywork a little bit more. This makes it a bit more flowing, a little bit more continuous. So again, for me, this is a plus. I prefer the way that this looks, but certainly many people don't. And there is some charm in the lines of the older car, I will definitely give you that, but they're both extraordinarily pretty. Let's find out how it drives in the modern world, how it compares to other cars of the era. And then, of course, those two important reasons why it ended up being less desirable than its older brother. One of them you might have guessed already. So the first thing that comes to mind, driving position is actually pretty good. You've got this massive, massive wheel, and it is one of those cars where the stereotype of piloting a ship really does come to mind, because the steering wheel is massive, it's very tactile, lovely sort of wood finish, very thin rim, communicates everything. And the weighing, once you're moving, again, this is a non-power assisted car, the weighing is absolutely bob on. The steering is very, very slow, and the DB6 is quite ponderous in changing direction. Immediately you realise this is no sports car, even by the standards of the 60s. Really endearingly, this one has a speedo which is absolutely all over the place. I just love that. You get it in older cars. But it is jumping around as if it was possessed. The engine is an absolute peach. It's a 4-litre straight 6, 280 horsepower. It is really, really smooth at lower revs. When you go past about 4.5, it roughens up a little bit, but it's very, very drivable. The gearbox. The gearbox is really heavy. It's really stiff. But what I do like about it is that when you engage the gear, it's just got definite travel. There's no slop in it at all. The cabin looks gorgeous, but I have to say the amount of instruments, the way they're laid out, the switch gear, it's all extremely confusing. Some of these switches, typical 60s stuff, are lovely, they're very nice to use, but it's certainly, I don't think clarity was the priority at the time. Something else I love about this, it must be one of the first cars to have adjustable suspension from the cabin. There's a little rotary dial there on this car, and I think on practically all the cars that have survived, it's been disconnected. I'm not sure how effective it was at the time, but you used to be able to vary the stiffness of the rear suspension through this dial inside the cabin. The gearbox is really stiff, really not cheap, but it is super, super precise. So once you've engaged the gear, you know the stick isn't moving 1 centimetre further. You have to use a little bit of force to do it. Oops. So turning around is a bit of a task between the power steering and that gear change. Let's give it a bit of a pull. Oh. It just slowly but inexorably gathers pace. Even by today's standards, it's not a slow car. I mean, it's not fast, but considering 1960s, 7.5 seconds, it was a quick car, 150 miles an hour, top speed, 280 horsepower, round the bends like this. Well, it'll go round the bends, but it doesn't particularly appreciate it. I think it's smoothness is definitely rewarded. You want to set it up before the bend and then just sort of glide it through. No sudden changes of direction or braking or anything like that, because it moves around quite a lot. The suspension is reasonably soft. For this car, because the wheelbase had been lengthened, they used unequal lengths on the rear beam, and that in fact helps the handling and makes it roll a little bit less, so a DB5 would be more prone to roll. This isn't terrible, but it is an older car. It does move around, but it rather suits the character. I wouldn't have expected it to be pin sharp. The engine, though, I think is what dominates the experience of the DB6. It's so linear, but it just keeps on and on building up steam until you get past sort of 5,000. It doesn't feel like it particularly wants to go too much past that. It's redlined at 5.5, but I don't think there's any point pulling it quite as far as that. One of the benefits of having the softer springing is that the ride is really, really mature. Now, I don't just mean soft. It feels well damped. It makes it feel like a quality car because it just rides so well. Now again, on this left-hander, you see when you tip it in, the nose just digs in and it feels like it doesn't particularly want to go around the corner. A lot of weight up front is the way it feels. But there's so much room in the cabin. For me, being quite tall, I am perfectly comfortable, and it's rare in a car of this era. The reach to the wheel is great, to the gear change as well. My legs are stretched out. I'm comfortable. There's a little bit of offset here. The pedals aren't too, I can't work out quite what it is. It's the wheel that's offset, and it's at an angle as well. But apart from that, very nice place to be. A little bit noisier, maybe that's one of the things you would realise compared to a more modern car. But for a 60s car, very, very well civilised. So in essence, this is a car that drives extremely well. And it does behave better. It's more usable than a DB5. So why is the DB5 so much more desirable? Well, first of all, the DB6 was a little bit a victim of its own success. There is the issue with that back end, which is not considered as pretty, but it's also that Aston made it so much more usable as a car that it sold in much greater numbers. So only just over 1,000 DB5s were sold, and instead DB6s over 1,800. So that in itself, there's the rarity factor, which made quite a big difference. But I think at least as significant is the DB5's showbiz history. The DB5 was featured in quite a few Bond films, but the first two were Goldfinger and Thunderball. It was then retrospectively featured in some of the more modern ones just because it had been in the earlier ones. Whereas the DB6, I don't know why, it's never appeared in any of those films, and of course, being a Bond car has a huge cachet. Despite all that, if I myself could pick which one of the two I'd want to own, without doubt it would be the 6. I think the looks are more to my taste, it's more homogeneous as a design, and it's a much more usable car. You know what, the DB6 is a lovable car. The brakes on this one aren't brilliant. I think maybe they need a bit of attention. I know as standard they're maybe not the best, but they're not bad. But yes, a very lovable car, quite easy to live with and very easy to drive around. I think the size helps as well. It's not a big car, and oh my god, when it arrived today, just how beautiful is this thing? I was gobsmacked because I knew they were pretty. I knew I would like it, but wow, I really liked it much more than I thought. It's just stunning. So really, this was a success for Aston. It sold in much greater numbers than their previous cars, and financially it must have helped. It was also quite a fashionable car at the time because it was owned by celebrities like Twiggy, Prince Charles still has his, Mick Jagger, Peter Sellers. So overall, quite a success. It's odd that today it doesn't command the same prices as its older brother. For me personally, I would want to pick one of these, and I really love driving it today. Thank you all so much for watching. I really look forward to seeing you for the next video. If you have an Aston that you would like me to feature on the channel, please do get in touch. I'm really interested in the older cars, and in particular at the moment I am looking for one of the V8 models that superseded this. Thank you so much, and see you soon.